evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Mythgard Academy. Tonight is session number 26, Until We Have Faces. And we have, I think, 6 slides remaining in the text. So I think we're going to do it. In fact, let's jump straight back into it. Oops, that's not what I wanted. This is what I wanted. Okay. Let's go to the reunion. We got up to, but not including, the reunion between Oraal and Psyche. And will the gods one day grow thus beautiful, grandfather? They say, but even I who am dead do not yet understand more than a few broken words of their language. Only this I know. This age of ours will one day be the distant past, and the divine nature can change the past. Nothing is yet in its true form. But as he said this, many voices from without, sweet and to be feared, took up the cry. She comes, Our Lady returns to her house, the goddess Psyche, back from the lands of the dead, bringing the casket of beauty from the Queen of Shadows. Come, said the fox. I think I had no will in me at all. He took my hand and led me out between the pillars. The vine leaves brushed my hair, into the warm sunlight. We stood in a fair, grassy court, with blue, fresh sky above us, mountain sky. In the center of the court was a bath of clear water, in which many could have swum and sported together. Then there was a moving and rustling of invisible people, and more voices, now somewhat hushed. Next moment I was flat on my face, for Psyche had come, and I was kissing her feet. All right. We talked a little bit about the divine nature changing the past and the gods growing beautiful. We talked about that a bit last week. I want to focus on the Psyche meeting today. So notice first, Leafniggle, great place to start. That little detail about the vine leaves brushing her hair, right? One of the things I think that is important about that, it is confirming. This is, remember the question about, like, is it a vision? Whether in the body or out of the body, she couldn't tell, right? All that stuff with her later visions. It is, I think, the sense of corporeality with that, right? This is not just a picture. She's been looking at pictures on the wall, right? This is now the 4th wall. Remember, she was going around the 4 walls of the room. 3 walls had the pictures. She came to the end of the 3rd wall with those last temptations of Psyche that we looked at last time. And now she turns to the 4th wall, which is open, and she walks through. And the pillars, which of course recall to us the pillar room, are there like a frame, right? And she passes through the frame, and we get that little reminder of the vine leaves brushing her hair, the reminder that she is physical, that she is here in this corporeal way, or at least is experiencing it corporally, right? It's like she's walked into the frame of the picture, which, remember, in the last one, she was saying, don't say inside the picture, say in that other world, right? Because it was clearly happening, right? It was clearly there. She's now, again, she's stepping through, but she's stepping through bodily. This is not a vision within the vision. This is real. Yeah, and Hapuna, but you're right. At the same time, this is also the final part of the story between her and Psyche. She's been seeing that starting from the beginning, right? When she saw Psyche tie the girdle around her feet and attempt to commit suicide in a river. And she cried out, do not do it, remember? The parallels between her and Psyche, the way in which she and Psyche were both in the story, but now she saw that story from the other side. Yeah, that has been going on all around the room. And now we come to the final stage of that story, when she is no longer just looking at pictures, but she's now confronting it face to face, confronting Psyche, confronting the story. Their 2 stories come together here in the end there. And so I think that's clearly one of the things that we see. But now let's talk about the setting more a little bit. The invisible people. Maureen, absolutely. The invisible people were in Psyche's palace, right? Remember, Psyche found that weird, right? That she was being waited on by invisible people, but she could feel them and felt weird about it. Remember, felt weird about her own mortality. So we may remember those passages from earlier on. Also, the fact that the people that she can't see, the rustling, the moving and rustling of invisible people, she can hear them. Not only their voices, but the moving and rustling, like they're wearing clothes, but she can't hear, she can't see them, right? But she can hear not only their voices, like it's not just that their attempts to communicate come through, but she can sense their presence, right? And yet she can't see them. Just like she couldn't see the house, she couldn't see the people up on top of the mountain before, which again, as Maureen reminds us, Psyche couldn't either, especially when she first got there, right? And Psyche, had this sense of progression, right? That as she herself grew accustomed to the place, right? As she herself, completed the transition that she was clearly in the midst of between mortality and divinity. The apotheosis she was undergoing, which even Oraal can perceive when she meets her, when that process was complete, then presumably the final union would have happened. Not only the full perception of the other divine creatures around her, right? But also even meeting her husband face to face, which she had not yet been able to do, right? Yeah. Hapuna, you're absolutely right. The story is coming full circle from where it began when she first saw Psyche when she crossed the river. Yeah, exactly. Yes, yeah. So they say, she comes. Our Lady returns to her house. And so here we get the confirmation of what we were talking about before, what we were kind of wondering before. This place with the pillars and the pictures on the wall that Oraal has gotten to, has she been brought to the house? To Psyche's house? The house of the god? The house of Psyche? Right? That she before couldn't see, and which she before, more importantly, really didn't want to see, and wanted to reject, didn't want to share Psyche with this other world. And now, notice what has happened. She's stepping outside. Oraal is stepping outside. When Psyche returns, Our Lady returns to her house, the goddess Psyche, back from the lands of the dead. Psyche's process is complete now. That process of growing from mortality, from mortal into divine, right? She is now the goddess Psyche. I'm tempted to quote Bilbo here at the end of The Hobbit and say, so the old stories that priest in that chapel told about the goddess Istra have proven true after a fashion, right? Yeah, they have turned true after a fashion, right? She is now the goddess Psyche. She has come back from the lands of the dead. Remember when they changed the face covering, right? When they changed the clothes of the statue of Istra from black to white, right? When they uncovered her face, the statue's face, of course. It turns out to be true, right? But notice the other thing that has happened. Before, Oraal was very much on the outside. Not only on the outside of the house, of Psyche's house, her divine house up on the mountain. She was on the outside of the valley, right? There was that river, that boundary that Psyche had to help her cross. And then she was brought in, but she was sort of not brought in. She held herself to be an outsider. She insisted on remaining an outsider, and she couldn't, even perceive the gifts of Psyche that she was giving her, the food and the water and the cup, right? She couldn't see the house. But now you see what's happening? Psyche's returning to the house, and what does she find? She finds Oraal there waiting for her. Oraal is stepping out of the house to greet Psyche as she comes, right? That is pretty remarkable, right? That's an amazing turn, right? An amazing shift. It's not just that this time it would be enough, in a sense, right? It would be enough of a step forward if this time Psyche succeeded in bringing Oraal in, if Oraal consented to go in this time, right? If before the house that was visible is now visible to her, right? And she doesn't deny it. She doesn't try to rewrite the past and convince herself that it didn't happen, the sight, the vision of it, right? That all would have been a lot, right? That all would have been significant. But instead, we get more than that, right? It's now this time Oraal who's welcoming Psyche in. Psyche who is bringing the casket of beauty from the Queen of Shadows. Why is she bringing the casket of beauty from the Queen of Shadows? What is she supposed to do with the casket of beauty from the Queen of Shadows? She is supposed to... Her task, you'll recall, is to bring the casket of beauty to Unot in order to make Unot beautiful. Right? Yeah. Hapuna Girl says, this fulfills Psyche's wish that Oraal could be a part of what she had with the god of the mountain. Yeah, she was hoping that Oraal would be able to stay, right? That she too could come to see it in time. Yes. JJ, I think you are right to remember. I will allow this again. I'm I hope you guys understand. I was just got to see Jackie and Jocelyn and several others of you at SoCal Moot this past weekend. And I was teasing Jackie about her C.S. Lewis quotes, and I was like, "Hey, we can talk about the Four Loves now." But lots of people have been quoting different, like, very relevant other, like, either Bible texts or Lewis texts, which are indeed, I think, certainly very relevant to what Lewis is doing here. I just don't want to get too sidetracked on them because we don't have enough time. But JJ, I will allow that one, and that is the parable of the prodigal son, because many people, even if you don't know the New Testament, may know of this story, right? Of the son who goes and wastes all of his father's money, and then he returns to his father's house, and he comes back to his father's house expecting, like, his plan returning to his father's house is to beg to just be made a slave in his father's house. Like, can I just live here as a servant? I'm not asking to be treated as a son, just under any conditions. Can I just come back and live here? And instead of being, instead of that, his father, runs out to him and embraces him and welcomes him, as if he was one returned from the dead. And I certainly think that is relevant here. The kind of what is happening with Oraal. Remember that Oraal just watched the third temptation of Psyche, in which that Oraal thing that she saw in the picture was trying to detour Psyche, trying to prevent Psyche from completing her task, trying to root her to those other things and to get her to leave the path of her divine task, to stop her completing her task to bring the casket of beauty from the Queen of Shadows. She was trying to prevent the Oraal thing, was trying to prevent that from happening. The Oraal wraith. Yes, exactly. Yes. Not only, and so of course Oraal has just been forcibly, in having to watch that, she's just been forcibly reflecting on what she did to Psyche, right? And it's clear that she's been reflecting on that. It's clear from her actions. As Maureen, I think it was Maureen. As Maureen pointed out before, the significance of she falls flat on her face in front of Psyche and kisses her feet. That's her response to confronting Psyche again, right? To beg Psyche's forgiveness. She literally abases herself before Psyche. She knows that she needs forgiveness from Psyche for the horrible emotional blackmail that she committed before. Remember the Oraal's wraith's arm dripping with blood, right? So, and yet, well, we'll see what happens in response to that. Notice, by the way, what that is like, what that recalls. What was the first of the temptations that Psyche had to resist in this third task? It was the people of Glome, right? Saying, be our goddess, let us worship you, right? And that, of course, was what the people did, fall at her feet and kiss her feet. That was one of the things that really ticked off Redival, right? Psyche was being worshipped as a goddess. And now Oraal is acting as if she were a goddess. And indeed, she's just been announced as a goddess, the goddess Psyche, back from the lands of the dead. It seems that Psyche managed to die before she died, right? And has returned with the casket of beauty from the Queen of Shadows. Maureen, what a marvelous observation that is. Maureen says, thinking of the fox's line there, nothing is yet in its true form. And she said it reminds her of Ungit's face being many faces. Yeah. The Unot stone has no face, and so therefore it has 100 faces, right? And remember, why is Unot ugly? The Unot face that the narrative kind of settles on here in Book 2 is that, like, bloated, disgusting, Bata-like face, right? The face that Oraal sees in the mirror when she looks in the mirror down in the pillar room below the pillar room, right? But why? Why does Unot look like that? As Maureen reminds us, Unot, and as Oraal confessed, Unot has 1,000 faces, right? It's the face that Oraal saw, right? When she was looking at the stone, what face did she see in Unot? And that's the face that she saw in Unot. Leif, yeah, I agree. The native stone has no inherent ugliness necessarily. It's ugly only by usage and by reflection. Yes. Hapuna says it. I'm guessing that it reflects our broken humanity. And Hapuna, I think the key word there is reflects. She saw that ugly Unot face in the mirror, in the dream pillar room below the pillar room below the pillar room. But I think she was already looking in a mirror when she was looking on Unot. The stone, I mean, when she chose that face. Kind of like she chose to not believe that the house was there, right? Yeah. So, Maureen, I think that's a really, really important thing to remember. Nothing is yet in its true form. The divine nature can change the past. Before, I was late starting because the live attendees were already here when I got here, and they were talking amongst themselves and having a really interesting discussion, and I got to reading it before we started up. And one of the questions that you guys were asking, which is a very sensible question, is why does Unget seem to be associated, like how do we understand Unget in this story? Unget seems to be associated with like horribleness, right? The devouring and everything, right? And yet, I think, Maureen, this comes right back to the observation that you made. Is Unget horrible? Right? That realization that she is Unget, right? She was certainly realizing that there was horribleness to herself, that she had devoured those that she loved and those who had loved her, right? I don't question that Orwell's insight into her own heart there at the end is a genuine one. And it certainly seems to match what we saw earlier on, right? What is eventually revealed to her and which she recognizes in herself. The identification of that ugliness, that internal spiritual ugliness in herself, the connection of that to Unget, that's her. That's her connection, right? Is that true? Is that real? Is Unget really like that, in a sense? In a sense of the word really, right? Again, the ugly face of Unget that she saw, that face which becomes like the face of this spiritual ugliness, the thing that she sees in the mirror when she confronts her real self, right? That's not necessarily what Unget really is. That's what Oraal really was. That's her association. And as Jackie points out, that's not the Unget that the old woman, or that matron who came and prayed before the Unget statue during the vigil. That's not the Unget that she met, that she knows. To her, Unget was a great comfort. She wouldn't have called Unget ugly. She wouldn't have associated Unget merely with devouring. Not at all. In a lot of ways, what this suggests is the hideousness of Unget, physically, spiritually, the horribleness of the whole thing, has been due to a couple things, right? First, to the nature of the symbols being used. Again, remember that vigil and the symbol of the like knocking on the door and sprinkling wine. Remember all those things, the play acting, right? That Oraal was thinking about. Those are signs, right? Those are symbols that are designed to point to spiritual things. But even the horrible things, like the temple prostitutes, right? Those are also signs that are pointing to something else, right? Are the signs horrible? Yeah, they kind of are. It's not, there's no like defense for the house of Unget in one sense, right? Yes, it is horrible. The life of those temple prostitutes is horrible. Yes. Orwell's not wrong when she perceives that. But is that the truth about Unget? When the fox calls the people of Glome barbarians and thinks that they know little of the divine nature and that the things that they do and say are a blasphemy against the divine nature, he's not wrong. Right? The fox is not wrong about everything, right? Yeah. Okay. But yes, Jackie, I agree. Orwell's whole perception of the world is colored by her own bitterness. Yes. Again, her own, like, her world, when she was growing up, there were many ways in which her world was a horrible world. Yes. Yes. Um, yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, exactly. Not without reason, as you say, Jackie. Exactly. Exactly. Um, yes. And Liz, you're right about the worst thing about the gods being the things that people do in the names of the gods. Yeah. Yeah. No, and um, that is something that this book has invited us to confront many times, right? Um, and all of these things contributed to Orwell's mental image of Ungit, right? Of the ugliness of Ungit. Ungit the Devourer, right? The mother of the Shadow Brute. But now Psyche has come, bringing the casket of beauty from the Queen of Shadows. She has gone to the land. She has died before she died. Psyche has gone to the land of the dead, the lands of the dead, and she has brought back beauty to make Ungit beautiful. And I think there is something in there that has to do with perception, right? I saw you guys talking a little bit a few minutes ago about, like, is she being made beautiful? Is she perceiving beauty for the first time, right? Like beauty that was always there. I think that there's that question about Ungit as well, basically, that we're invited to ask that question with the casket of beauty. Because of course it's the thing about beauty, isn't it? On the one hand, beauty is about perception, like how other people respond to you is one definition of beauty, right? Or maybe you can think of it as an intrinsic characteristic of the thing. But beauty has always been a little bit fungible in this story. Remember that Psyche, who was most beautiful, when she was a child, could make ugly things beautiful just by her attention to them, right? We saw that in a small way all the way from the beginning, right? Yes, the casket of beauty coming from the land of death. She had to die first. Yes, exactly. And she has, as Hapuna says, served Oraal out of love and mercy. She has gone to the land of the dead, and now she has passed through death herself. Psyche has, in order to bring beauty to Ungit. That was the term of the task, but of course, as we know full well, she is Ungit. Oraal is Ungit. And yes, Leaf, as you say, here Oraal, the chanciest of all, yes, is made beautiful. Yes, yes. But that's not her experience right away, right? Her experience is falling flat on her face. And that does seem significant. She's only just recently gotten a face, right? Her own true face was only just revealed during the trial of the gods, in which she was reading out her book again and again, right? How can we meet the gods face to face till we have faces? She had a face, and she found it to be a horrible face that she had. And now she is falling flat on that face. She's still naked. Oraal is. Remember, she was stripped in the trial. And she falls flat on her face in front of Psyche and is kissing her feet. one last thing, the business about the bath. In the center of the court was a bath of clear water, in which many could have swum and sported together. I can't help but remember all the other water, all those rivers of death, right? That you wade through in order to die, either to commit suicide or to pass through into the land of the gods on the other side, the garden of the gods, where the rams of beauty are. Remember, but now we don't have this, the dangerous river. The water isn't a boundary anymore. Now it's a play place, right? It's a bath in which many could have swum and sported together. Yes, less like a boundary and more cleansing, but even more than cleansing, something to be enjoyed. Yeah, exactly. Something to be enjoyed. I don't think the bath is like baptism. I think the river was like baptism. Baptism is about death, after all, right? So, no, and it's a bath, so it could be sort of cleansing. But again, that's not the emphasis. The emphasis is swimming and sporting. Fun, right? Now the water is for pure enjoyment. Why is the water there? Well, why should your heart not dance, right? Why should you not swim and play? That was a thing associated with the gods from her first trip up the mountain, though she was so resistant to that, you'll remember, right? Yeah. Arthur, it is an outgrowth of the Jewish mikveh. It is. But it is, the symbolism of death is explicitly imposed upon it, added to that. It's still about purification as well, but the death thing is an extra layer that's explicitly added to it. Yeah. But anyway, yes, Leif and Maureen, completely correct. It's like Eden. That the people here are naked and unashamed, right? This is paradise, and paradise is not only beautiful, but it's fun, right? The carefree joy, absolutely. That's what I'm getting from the bath of clear water there, in which many could have swum and sported together. It's not just a place that looks like it might be fun to swim, right? But lots of people can. It's a place of communal fun, right? Fun plus community. Yeah. Yes, exactly. But let's move on past the kissing of the feet. "O Psyche, O goddess," I said, "never again will I call you mine, but all there is of me shall be yours. Alas, you know now what it's worth. I never wished you well, never had one selfless thought of you. I was a craven." Orwell's confession. And she confesses straight to the heart of the matter. None of the obfuscations, the things that came out when her own words and voice were revealed in the trial of the gods, right? That jealousy, that extreme possessiveness, right? And she leads with, "Never again will I call you mine, but all there is of me shall be yours." This is both so like and so unlike the love that she had for Psyche before. She was devoted to Psyche before. She would have said 1,000 times, she almost did say 1,000 times, that she would give all of herself for Psyche, right? But you'll remember that even at the time we could see through that. There was evidence that that's not what was in her heart. We could see again and again in how she betrayed in her own words that she wasn't really saying, "I give all of myself to you." She was really saying, "I want all of yourself for me," right? But now she says a thing that she might have said before, "All there is of me shall be yours." but you can tell that this time it's not just that she means it, it's that she understands it. Yeah, fire swans, you're exactly right. Never again shall I call you mine could be such a tragic statement earlier in the book, but now it's quite different. I agree. And the same thing, I would say the same thing about the second half. All there is of me shall be yours, right? That too would have been a kind of a tragic statement earlier in the book. Alas, you know now what it's worth. What all there is of me is worth, right? I never wished you well, never had one selfless thought of you. I was a craven. That she never wished Psyche well, again, this is the confession of what we could see very clearly before. She not only didn't desire Psyche's happiness, she begrudged Psyche's happiness and joy. All of her thoughts of Psyche were loving thoughts, but they were all selfish thoughts. Yeah. Thank you. I was wondering about that. The word craven seemed to me very strange. Craver, you guys have? That's interesting. This is from the iBooks text that I copied this. I don't have my physical copy on hand. One who craves. That makes a lot more sense than craven. Craven means coward, right? One who craver would make all kinds of more sense. Is that what everybody has in their other text? That's really interesting. Yeah. By the way, one of the morals of the story, and you can see it here and we've seen it in other places as well, you always have to be a little bit careful. Well, not just ebooks. I was about to say ebooks are often wrong, like poets. But it's not just that. Printed books can be wrong too, right? Okay. Craver. There it is. I was a craver. Yeah, exactly. Lies of ebooks. Feanaro. Just so. I was a craver. Hang on, that bothers me so much I'm going to change it. Hang on. I was a craver. That way I won't misread it if I say it out again. Okay. All right. I was a craver. Fixed. I was a craver. She identifies herself with her own desire, right? Yeah, craven does work in its own way, but I don't want to get distracted by it because I do. It's different. I mean, to say that she was a coward, there was an element of cowardice in it, but the craving is important, right? Exactly, Ambrosia. See, just like the gods can change the past, I can change the text. Yeah, exactly. Okay, excellent. The 1956 hard copy says craver. Very good. There you go. Yeah. The reason I think that word is really important is that it's about love, right? She is characterizing. Notice what she does not say. She does not say, I never loved you. She did love Psyche. She absolutely loved Psyche. She just loved her in this particular way. To crave something, to desire something, even to desire it selfishly, to want to possess it for yourself, to claim it for your own. That is a kind of love. That's too common a kind of love. Sometimes the loving and the devouring are one, as she learned, right? So to say I was a craver to say I was a craver And I suspect, by the way, yes, you can say craven as a noun in that context. It would work. A craven as a noun simply means a coward. Like it's a synonym for coward, essentially. Except without insulting cows and the people who tend them. But yeah. Anyway, and I think the text, I think it was just like craven is unusual, but craver is not a normal word at all, right? Yeah. I was a craver. Again, in saying this, she is not denying her love, because it would be untrue to say, I find that I never really loved you. What she is saying is, I know that I never loved you wholesomely, right? I never loved you for yourself. I never wished you well. I never had one selfless thought of you. I never thought about you. I always thought about myself. I loved you because you made me feel special. I loved you because I wanted ownership of you, right? But it was love. Just as she loved Bardia, just as she loved the fox. Yeah. And I agree. Craver is a weird word. I can see why somebody changed it to craven and why they thought that made more sense. Because it's an awkward word, right? But I think it's meant to be awkward. You'll remember, of course, how even quite recently Oraal was still comforting herself that at least she loved Psyche truly. Remember? So we now see that her confrontation of herself has been complete, right? She now sees herself clearly. She bent over to lift me up. Then, when I would not rise, she said, But Maya, dear Maya, you must stand up. I have not given you the casket. You know I went a long journey to fetch the beauty that will make Unot beautiful. Now, you will laugh at me when I say that moment always took me by surprise. There is something in, like, I'd always processed the I am Unot stuff, right? Like, that was clear enough. Her association of herself with Unot and all the ugly things that she associates with Unot, right? And so there was like that on the one hand, and then on the other hand was the myth, right? This Cupid and Psyche myth, the myth of Psyche being sent to bring the beauty, the basket of beauty to Aphrodite, right? And for some reason, when this came together, when this gets kind of switched around like this, when she comes to present the casket to Oraal, there's something about that always feels like it catches me by surprise. And Cal Elros, I think you're exactly right. I am Unot, when Oraal says I am Unot, it's always an internalized thing with Oraal. It's just about her way she conceives herself. Psyche's statement here is the first moment it becomes external to Oraal. Yeah, I think that maybe that's it, the way those two things come together. But this moment when you realize the entire purpose of her task was for the blessing of Oraal. That's what she's been working for all this time. That's what Psyche's been doing and suffering for. But wait, Oraal herself bore those sufferings, right? As she saw in the pictures. She bore the sufferings and Psyche completed the tasks. Yeah. Jackrabbit, that is fascinating. So Jackrabbit Monster says, according to the OED, craver has an obsolete sense that means an appellant or accuser. Jackrabbit, what are the dates of the usages for that word, for that definition of the word? When was the last time that obsolete sense was used? Could you give me some of the quotations? This is why the OED is awesome. So he's wondering if Lewis had this sense in mind of craver as an appellant or an accuser. Circa 1300? If it were Tolkien, I'd say that's an absolute dead ringer. But I think it's not unlikely. It is interesting. Because she certainly is that. An appellant, an accuser. The accuser of the gods. Right? Yeah. Merriam-Webster's unlikely to tell you that one, Jackie. This is why the OED is the best. It's the difference between some modern editor telling you what a word means and somebody showing you how a word has been used over the centuries. Yeah. Oh, interesting. It's used in a Middle English Psalter? Huh. Fascinating. And Maca the craver so hisal. From the Old English, cravian, to demand or claim as a right. So cool. So cool. Yes. Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, like I said, if this were Tolkien, I'd be like, well, obviously Tolkien knows that. With Lewis, again, it's less of a slam dunk, but I think it's pretty likely. I think it's pretty likely. And again, that means an accuser, because she certainly was an accuser. Oh, no, I'm not forgetting Lewis's medieval scholarship. It's just the only reason I say that about it not being quite as much of a slam dunk is that Lewis wasn't like as plugged into Old English, like the language, as Tolkien was. Tolkien would look at the word craver and be like, oh, well, like from the, Old English cravian, right? Like he would do that in a heartbeat, right? Lewis probably would, but, only like a 90% chance instead of a 100% chance. But, yeah. So no, I think it's very likely, and that's fascinating. And that, Jackie, would help us to understand why, Jackie, you were talking about how craver is such a weird and kind of awkward word there. But that would explain why, if you were playing with that deliberately, right? If you were deliberately using that word in an obsolete sense. Like he wanted that word because of the obsolete sense, but also because it works in modern English too, to talk about craving and desire and devouring and all that stuff. Right. Yeah. Okay. Ambrosius, really good point. Ambrosius is wondering about the significance of Psyche saying, I have not given you the casket. I think that's really important to think about what the casket means. I went on a long journey to fetch the beauty that will make Ungit beautiful. She's not given it to her yet. That is to say, the beautiful confession that Oraal just made, that beautiful self-recognition, was made before she'd been given the casket. It is certainly not true that Oraal is still horrible, right? Ugly in body and ugly in soul, until she gets the magic casket and is suddenly transformed into a beautiful person, right? Yes, Jackie, Orwell's already becoming beautiful without the casket. Exactly. I think that's what our attention is being drawn to here, right? I don't know if Orwell's already all the way there, right? But I think at least what we're seeing is a process, not unlike the process of Psyche's own apotheosis earlier on, right? She wasn't quite a goddess yet before when Oraal met her up on the mountain, but she was kind of getting there. She was already taller, right? She was a stronger, remember all those things? I wonder if we're seeing this, but again, it's not being emphasized about Oraal. Orwell's not near any mirrors. Nobody else is talking about her appearance. So we don't know how her physical body might have been changing already leading up to this moment before she gets the casket, right? But certainly her spiritual ugliness has been changing, right? And she's not even been given the casket yet. And in this case, notice now what receiving the casket means. Receiving the casket means accepting this grace from Psyche, right? Psyche doesn't only forgive her for everything she did against her. She doesn't only forgive Oraal for her selfishness, her possessiveness, her attempts to devour her, her emotional blackmail, right? And emotional torture that she put Psyche through. Psyche doesn't just forgive her for that. Psyche says, you must stand up. You know I went on a long journey to fetch the beauty that will make Unot beautiful. All of the tasks that I've been on were for you. Why couldn't Oraal bear to hear the chains creaking in the yard of the palace? Because they made her think of the weeping, always weeping. The weeping of Psyche as she went out in her exile and roamed the world as a beggar, right? And she knew that it was because of her that Psyche was forced to do these things. She knows that it was at least to some extent her fault that Psyche was being punished, such that Oraal asked for Psyche's punishment to fall on her herself instead, right? And now we see several things at once, right? We just saw in the pictures that Psyche's sufferings did fall on Oraal, and Oraal endured the pain of the tasks and enabled Psyche to complete them, not only without pain, but with joy. But we also see that Psyche's wanderings, that Psyche's punishments were done because of Oraal, right? Oraal was feeling that it was her fault that Psyche was suffering. And that's not wrong. That's true in a sense. But notice how it has been transformed. As Psyche says, I went on a long journey to fetch the basket that will make Unot beautiful. Orwell's been saying she had to endure all this because of me. And now Psyche, when she meets her again, says, Dear Maya, I did all of this because of you. Exactly, Jackie. It's just like the gods changing the past. Yeah, the gods have changed the past. Exactly. Yes. You must stand up. She has to stand up so that Psyche can give her the casket and complete the task to make Unot beautiful. I stood up then, all wet with a kind of tears that do not flow in this country. She stood before me, holding out something for me to take. Now I knew that she was a goddess indeed. Her hands burned me, a painless burning, when they met mine. The air that came from her clothes and limbs and hair was wild and sweet. Youth seemed to come into my breast as I breathed it. And yet, this is hard to say, with all this, even because of all this, she was the old Psyche still, 1,000 times more her very self than she had been before the offering. For all that had then but flashed out in a glance or a gesture, all that one meant most when one spoke her name, was now wholly present, not to be gathered up from hints nor in shreds, not some of it one moment and some in another. Goddess? I had never seen a real woman before. Did I not tell you, Maya, she said, that a day was coming when you and I would meet in my house and no cloud between us? Salute me for a prophetess, she might have said. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out what to say. The thing that strikes me most about this paragraph is this description of Psyche. Is that, on the one hand, it sounds like a description of the gods. Remember what Oraal always complained of, right? Why do the gods not just reveal themselves, right? Why do they only speak in dreams and visions and we get glimpses and hints, right? Why do they not just reveal themselves? How she talks about Psyche here is like that. Now I know Psyche is a goddess now, we've been told. But there's more to it than that. Because she's thinking about the old Psyche. She's thinking about mortal Psyche. She's thinking about the girl that she knew and loved, right? The old Psyche. What she sees, how has Psyche been transformed? Now that Psyche has become a goddess, now that the transition from mortal to divine that she was in the midst of before has been completed, what does it mean? What does it look like? Remember how Oraal was constantly thinking she was losing her. Remember her crying out that she and Psyche were on two banks with the gulf in between them, right? And the gulf was widening and she was going away. She was losing Psyche. Psyche was not going to be herself anymore. Not her Psyche, not Maya's own Psyche, right? But was becoming something else. Someone else. Now when she sees the process completed, she sees that she is 1,000 times more her very self than she had been before the offering. She now realizes that the beautiful Psyche, that go back to chapter 3, right, and look at all those descriptions of the gushing that we get from Oraal about how marvelous, how beautiful Psyche was, and the effect Psyche had on everyone and everything about her, right? And she now looks back on that time, the old Psyche before the offering, and says, what I saw before, in Psyche was just a flash in a glance or gesture. But everything that you meant most when you spoke her name, all of those wonderful things that you associated with her, that she associated with her clearly, right? Those things are now wholly present. She is far from having lost Psyche. She's now seeing Psyche face to face. And again, it's impossible for me to not connect this with what Oraal was saying about the gods before, right? Why do the gods not reveal themselves? Why do we only get glances and flashes and gestures, right? Leaf, I think you're right. She is now wholly present with a W, and she's also wholly present, just Holy, as well. Yeah, exactly. Not to be gathered up from hints nor in shreds. Doesn't that sound like her communications with the gods before? Not some in one moment and some in another. Not a riddle to figure out. Her experience of the divine Psyche here now kind of helps her to understand about the gods and the gods' revelation of themselves. But notice where she ends up. Goddess? I had never seen a real woman before. Do you see that? You see the significance of that? Her encounter with Psyche teaches us something about the gods, and of course I can't help but think back to the fox talking about the gods becoming beautiful, by which I believe they mean the gods revealing themselves more fully, so that their beauty is perceived, like people being allowed to see the palace, right? But again, it's not just her experience. When Oraal sees the divine Psyche and realizes this, how she's 1,000 times more her very self, her reaction to that is not, in fact, now I understand what the gods are like. Now I understand. Now I see the fullness behind all the hints and glances and visions. That's not her conclusion, right? Her conclusion is, I had never seen a real woman before. Her conclusion is, it's not just the gods that I had never seen and appreciated. I had never seen and appreciated humans before. She had never seen and appreciated Psyche as a mortal, or herself as a mortal. Remember, why can't we see the gods face to face? Why don't the gods reveal more of themselves? Because we don't have faces yet. Because we are going about veiled, like Oraal. When this process of transitioning from mortal to divine turns out, in Orwell's experience, to be about becoming her very self, right? Not a goddess that looks like her, or even a goddess that fulfills the promise, right, of that is what the mortal might have become, or something like that, right? But rather, this is what real people are. And the reason you don't see it is because of the veils, right? because of the veils that they wear. Yes, fire swans, it does seem the implication there is that we're all like this behind our veils. Well, at least women, apparently, right? But yeah, I assume this would apply to men too, probably. Yeah, that I think is exactly the insight. That's fire swans, I think, the unexpected conclusion that Oraal comes to when she finally sees the divine Psyche, right? Did I not tell you that a day was coming when you and I would meet in my house and no cloud between us? She did say that. And indeed, it is now happening again, right? Joy silenced me, and I thought I had now come to the highest, to the utmost fullness of being which the human soul can contain. But now, what was this? You have seen the torches grow pale when men open the shutters, and broad summer morning shines in on the feasting hall? So now. Suddenly, from a strange look in Psyche's face, I could see she knew something she had not spoken of, or from a glorious and awful deepening of the blue sky above us, or from a deep breath like a sigh uttered all round us by invisible lips, or from a deep, doubtful quaking and surmise in my own heart, I knew that all this had only been a preparation. Some far greater matter was upon us. The voices spoke again, but not loud this time. They were awed and trembled. He is coming, they said. The god is coming into his house. The god comes to judge Oraal. Again, notice the significance of this. Notice the significance implicit in the metaphor. Or simile. Yeah, he uses the word so. I guess it's a simile technically. The simile of the torches in a feasting hall, which when you open the shutter in broad summer morning shines in, the torches suddenly grow pale, right? You can barely even see the torches anymore when the light shines in. So now, right? On the one hand, this is all a simile for she felt that she had come to the utmost fullness of being, right? The meeting with Psyche, receiving not just the forgiveness, but the grace of Psyche in the casket of beauty, right? Which made everything right? Which changed the past and changed the past for the better. But all of that joy, the joy which silenced her, was like the torches in the feasting hall, right? And now the summer morning is shining in. But you see, exactly, an event occurring that is far greater than revealing the true nature of man and ultimate forgiveness. Yep, exactly. But you remember the significance of this? The God is coming. And his coming is like a dark place that you can't see in, right? And windows being thrown open and light flooding the place. Just exactly what Psyche before had been forbidden to do. She could only encounter the god in the darkness. Yeah, it's like bringing a lamp into a dark bedchamber. It's like the house of Unot, mighty Felix. You are exactly correct. It's like the house of Unot, too. Holy places are dark places. But the god is like the light, who shines in. the prohibition has been not just lifted, but reversed. His arrival is now the light which shines in and reveals the true nature of things, right? Yeah, like a lamp in a dark bedchamber. Yes. Yes. No longer are holy places dark places. Either the horrible darkness, the horrible holiness, and darkness and stench of the house of Unot, nor even the darkness of Psyche's marital bedchamber, right? All of that darkness is now passing. Why has he come? He has come to judge Oraal. Remember, that's what she was being sent off to. She had her day in court. She made her accusation against the gods. Now it's the gods' turn. That's what the fox was bringing her to, right? He volunteered for that. Her father volunteered also, but the fox stepped forward, right? Now the god is coming to judge her. It's her turn. Remember what happened before the gods were judged by her, before the accusation of the gods. Her veil was removed and she was stripped naked, right? That whole process of accusing the gods was her final exposure, the final exposure of her true self, the final exposure of her ugliness, right? Now, the god is coming to judge Oraal, and note how that coincides what has just happened. She has received the casket of beauty. Psyche gave it to her, the casket of beauty, remember? Like it doesn't get physically described. The burning hands, right? She stood before me holding out something for me to take. Her hands burned me when they met mine. And then she's just overwhelmed by Psyche and Psyche's presence, and we don't get any description of the thing that she has received or what it has done to her, right? But now, when she is still naked, right, but having received the casket of beauty, now she is coming to be judged by the gods. The god is coming into his house. The god comes to judge Oraal. If Psyche had not held me by the hand, I should have sunk down. She had brought me now to the very edge of the pool. Remember, she's met the god twice before, right? She met him on the mountain that night. She talked to him unquestionably, right, that night that she tried to commit suicide by the river. This is the third time. She had brought me now to the very edge of the pool. All three times are by water, right? First by the roaring river of the gods in spate, right, during the storm and the destruction of the valley on the mountaintop. Second time by the Shenet, which was going to be to her the waters of death because she was intending to commit suicide in it. And now to the edge of this pool, which looks so frolicsome and fun and inviting, right? She had brought me now to the very edge of the pool. The air was growing brighter and brighter about us, as if something had set it on fire. Each breath I drew let into me new terror, joy, overpowering sweetness. I was pierced through and through with the arrows of it. I was being unmade. I was no one. But that's little to say. Rather, Psyche herself was, in a manner, no one. I loved her as I would once have thought it impossible to love, would have died any death for her. And yet it was not now, she that really counted. Or if she counted, and oh gloriously she did, It was for another's sake. The earth and stars and sun, all that was or will be, existed for his sake. And he was coming. The most dreadful, the most beautiful, the only dread and beauty there is, was coming. The pillars on the far side of the pool flushed with his approach. I cast down my eyes. Yeah. I don't have so much to add to this. Notice the one obvious contrast that I think we're supposed to perceive. When she encounters, that is, when she physically touches Psyche, right, with the painless burning, she sees that Psyche is 1,000 times more her very self than she had been before, right? Now, she is being, Oraal herself is being unmade. I was no one. She has just had this insight into what real people are like, into the divinity that is, in fact, in humans, right? The fox, when he talks about the God within you, turns out to be right. The mythology of Glom, which says that there is divine blood in the race of the king, turns out to be correct also, both in their own fashion, right? Both have a some kind of glimpse of this truth, right? Ambrosius, thanks. Did Oraal receive the casket? Psyche holds out her hands to Oraal holds out her hands to Psyche, and the casket is no longer mentioned. Is it implied? Is it metaphorical? Is it no longer important? Yes. All of the above. The burning that, the painless burning that Oraal experiences seems to me to be like a transaction has occurred, right? The casket of beauty has been given. But again, notice what happens. What happens there, going back, what happens there is the fulfillment of what Oraal just said, right? Never again will I call you mine, but all there is of me shall be yours. I have never had a selfless thought of you. And what happens when she receives the casket of beauty? When she receives the casket of beauty, she's being made beautiful. How do you know she's made beautiful? Because she's not thinking of herself at all, right? In the moment when she receives the casket of beauty, all she can do is marvel at the beauty of Psyche. That she can now truly see it. That the real beauty of Psyche, the beauty which she so possessively loved before, was only a picture of it, right? So yes, did something happen there? Yeah. Why wasn't it described? Because that would involve Oraal focusing on herself, right? She's not focusing on herself. She's focusing on Psyche, not possessively, not selfishly, but because all there is of me shall be yours. Yeah. The waters of death have subsumed her fleshly, self-focused self. Yes. In receiving the casket of beauty from the Deadlands, in receiving the waters of death, she has died before she died. Yes. Remember the bowl? She thinks she's carrying a bowl to put the waters of death in, but it turns out to be her book, the roll. Not a bowl, but a roll, right, that she's carrying. The roll that's full of poison, right? The venom that she is going to spew out against the gods, that she is going to emit out of herself her true voice, her true words. It's not the waters of death for herself, right? It's the poison that's coming out of her. The bowl receives the waters of death and is the casket of beauty that is then brought to her by Psyche, and she receives the waters of death. The role of her book, which revealed her ugliness of soul, is now replaced by the bowl of the waters of death that she thought she was carrying, that Psyche brings to her. And now she dies before she dies, and she no longer thinks of herself. Again, the past, in a sense, is changed. Remember I said there was some like really awesome payoff for that whole like book and bowl thing that was going on there. Yes. Let's keep going. So she just looked down. She comes to the edge of the pool and she looks down. She looks down because she can't look the god in the face. She can't bring herself to look the god in the face, right? Two figures, reflections. Their feet to Psyche's feet and mine stood head downward in the water. But whose were they? Two Psyches, the one clothed, the other naked? Yes, both Psyches, both beautiful, if that mattered now, beyond all imagining, yet not exactly the same. You also are Psyche, came a great voice. I looked up then, and it's strange that I dared, but I saw no god, no pillared court. I was in the palace gardens, my foolish book in my hand. The vision to the eye had, I think, faded one moment before the oracle to the ear, for the words were still sounding. You also shall be Psyche, were his words before. Yes, Leaf, the pool here is now the redeemed mirror of the pillar room. Yes. Hapuna, exactly. You also shall be Psyche sounded punitive earlier. And now we see the fullness of God's mercy in this. Yes. And Argent Paintbrush, you're right. She has received mercy, not justice. Thank goodness, the fox would say. Right. Calvin, does she still look like herself? Does she actually look like Psyche? Yes. Notice it says that they're not exactly the same. They're not mirror images of each other, but they're both Psyches. They're both beautiful. They're both the goddess that she saw, that experience that she had of meeting a true woman, a true person for the first time, right? She now sees that herself as well, right? Both beautiful beyond all imagining, yet not exactly the same. It is a good time to remember that Psyche means soul. Yes, exactly. They are two Psyches, not exactly the same. Both 1,000 times more their very selves, presumably, than they were before. It turns out that her fear that some people received beautiful souls and some do not, isn't true. Her own ugliness of soul, that she felt was like the final insult given her physical ugliness throughout her life. Now that she has been fully revealed, now that she's received the waters of death, the casket of beauty, she is another Psyche, beautiful beyond all imagining. Nothing is yet in its true form, Jackie. Yeah, absolutely. Notice the change in tense. You also shall be Psyche before. You also are Psyche now. You also are Psyche. Yeah. And when she wakes, right, her book is her foolish book now, Maureen, as you point out. She wakes from her vision but still can hear the voice of the god proclaiming her to be Psyche. Does the tense change reflect her transformation? Yeah, it does. It does. Yes. The words are still sounding in her ears of who she is. She's holding the book in her hand and she's hearing words. Remember, why was she there? Why was she appearing? So that the god could judge her, right? She had her day in court. Now it's the god's turn. And that is the judgment of the god. You also are Psyche. Her trial's over. She is proclaimed. She has come to trial and has been found Psyche. And so, yes, Maureen, when we think of the associations between her book, right, and her book being the word that she has been saying all of her life without saying it, right? And she's holding her book, her foolish book, in her hand when she wakes up and hearing this other word, naming her identity. Right. You also are Psyche. That is the final word. That is the final judgment. Fire Swans, exactly. It turned out to be more of a promise than a threat all along. You also shall be Psyche. Right. Yes. Yeah. Orwell's final words. That was 4 days ago. They found me lying on the grass, and I had no speech for many hours. The old body will not stand many more such seeings. Perhaps, but who can tell, the soul will not need them. I have got the truth out of Arnhem. He thinks I am very near my death now. It's strange he should weep, and my women too. What have I ever done to please them? I ought to have had Darren here and learned to love him and taught him, if I could, to love them. I ended my first book with the words, no answer. I know now, Lord, why you utter no answer. You are yourself the answer. Before your face, questions die away. What other answer would suffice? Only words, words, to be led out to battle against other words. Long did I hate you. Long did I fear you. I might... Fanaro, you yourself are the answer as a correspondent to the gods have no answer, right? And also as a correspondence to you also are Psyche. The appearance of the god, the confrontation with the god, the judgment of the god revealed herself, that she was a goddess, that she was Psyche also. And he himself is the answer to her accusations, the answer to all of the questionings and accusations that she had to make in book one. What other answer would suffice? Yes, they have no answer because they are the answer. Exactly. Whatever else you get, you will not get justice. Yes. This, of course, is the last word of Oraal. The last thing she writes before she apparently drops dead are the words, "I might." I'm not 100% sure how she was going to finish that sentence. But I think, given that the sentence before she had said, "Long did I hate you, long did I fear you, I think she's saying, like, I might have, she's reflecting, right, backwards. Thinking about what she might have done had she reflecting back on the time she spent hating and fearing the gods. And how that might have been different, perhaps, right? But, in other words, she's thinking back about the past and how the past might have been changed, right? Yeah, Feanaro, I think that's exactly right. Oraal was complaining that the gods did not speak clearly. Now she accepts that they don't need to speak at all. Yes. It could equally well, Mighty Felix, be, she might have said, "I might have done something," like I was just suggesting. Mighty Felix is suggesting she might have said, "I might yet," like she might be thinking about the future. That's possible. I might now, Dorward, as you suggest. Yeah, possibly. I think the important thing, well, I say the important thing, what seems to me very significant here is that the very last words that she utters are words about the inadequacy of words. Only words, to be led out to battle against other words. She's a great battle leader, Oraal is, right? So it's almost like in that last sentence and a fraction that we get there, she's acknowledged that no answer, no words can suffice. But like she's going to have a go, right? Yeah. She's gonna have a go. But she can't, right? She fails. Her words fail her. Yeah. Yes. We get the epigram at the end. These are Orwell's last words, about the very last words of the book. Arnhem writes a little postscript. I, Arnhem, priest of Aphrodite, saved this roll and put it in the temple. From the markings after the word might, we think the queen's head must have fallen forward on them as she died, and we cannot read them. This book was all written by Queen Oraal of Glome, who was the most wise, just, valiant, fortunate, and merciful of all the princes known in our parts of the world. If any stranger who intends the journey to Greece finds this book, let him take it to Greece with him, for that is what she seems mostly to have desired. The priest who comes after me has it in charge to give up the book to any stranger who will take an oath to bring it into Greece. Yeah, JJ, no, this is the first time we've heard the priest of Glome refer to himself as the priest of Aphrodite. Yeah, I mean, we know the fox was teaching him to say that before, but this is an advanced state of that right here. Hapuna, I agree. After all of Oraal's self-deprecation, after the revelation of herself and everything that we saw, to hear the eulogy from Arnhem, right? The love and the reverence that they all feel for the queen, very far from being like a bloated spider in the middle of her web, right? Yeah, it is very striking. And Maureen, I come back to that wonderful observation you made earlier tonight, which has helped me so much, about perceiving the faces in the Unot stone, right? It's very much like that, right? Even in a sense, the face that she sees in the mirror is like the Unot stone, right? Yeah. Yes, I agree, Jackrabbit. That sentence, she had no idea how much she was loved. Oraal, the queen, right? Yes, yeah. Yes. And now Unot is Aphrodite, the beautiful, right? It's like a picture. It's like a parallel to Unot being made beautiful, isn't it? Yes. Yeah, I do think that it's important to remember she was good. She was all of those things. The most wise, just, valiant, fortunate, and merciful of all the princes known in our parts of the world. Yeah, she was all those things. She was a great queen. It didn't make all those other things that she thought about herself incorrect, right? But it does also show, think back to that never having seen a woman before, right? Think back to Psyche as she sees her, encounters her, being 1,000 times more her very self. Even back in the days when Oraal was, so much in awe of Psyche's beauty, and effect on everything around her and her perfect goodness, right? Now she realizes that those were just little glimpses, right? Those were just hints at the real Psyche, at the true beauty of Psyche. And the same is true here. Queen Oraal of Glome was the most wise, just, valiant, fortunate, and merciful of all the princes known in our parts of the world. She was great in all of these ways. And yet, even these things, these greatnesses that Arnhem is perceiving in her, are only glimpses, right? Are only promises of the beauty and the goodness that will be revealed in her when she will be 1,000 times more her very self, right? Hence, two Psyches standing next to each other at the edge of the pool, facing the god. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the end. And it is exactly the end of class to the minute. Come on now. Come on. How about that? Right? We did it. We got to the end. I don't know when exactly we stopped skipping any words in this book. We have certainly discussed a large percentage of the words in this book, and I think every single word of book 2. But that was amazing. I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful for this opportunity to go through this book together with you guys. You want to discuss Lewis's note at the end? I was going to leave that to you guys. He does give his note at the end where he goes through the story of Cupid and Psyche and just kind of talk about some of the changes that he made and everything. I feel we've talked about most of those things already. Yeah. So I'm gonna leave that. 'Cause again, we've talked it through such that the comments that he makes will fit with what we've seen. And it's a little bit less, he's not really doing much in the way of interpretation, but just kind of talking about the things that he, the ways in which he altered the story, when he was redoing the myth. And we've already kind of talked about some of those things. Anyway. All right. Thank you. I should have, I was so caught up with finishing the book that I forgot, to appoint a date. Let's start at the end of May. Let's start on May 29th, Wednesday, May 29th. So that's 3 weeks from today. Let's take a couple weeks off. The book we're doing next is The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. So we'll start on the 29th in 3 weeks, and we'll remind folks of that through social media and stuff. But thank you guys. This has been just phenomenal. Really, really appreciate it. I feel like I understand this book so much better than I did before. This has been such an enriching experience. Really appreciate it. So again, just for looking down the road, The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco is next. Then we're going to do The Peoples of Middle-earth to finish up. And then we're going to do something else. Phantastes after that. That's kind of the road ahead. Don't forget that we're going to do, and then of course this fall, the collected poems is coming out, right? I have some plans surrounding the collected poems, when they come out. Jack and Rob are doing Phantastes. That's happening. That's in the queue now. So I have plans for the poetry. I will say this, this coming Saturday, we are having a showcase of in our space program. It's our spring space showcase, broadcasting this coming Saturday. And at lunchtime, I will be joining them at, I think, 12:30, or maybe it's 12. Anyway, lunchtime, in the middle of the day of the space showcase. And there may be an announcement that will be poem relevant. So we'll see about that. All right. Anyway, thanks very much, everybody. I will see you again soon for our next book. In the meantime, thanks for listening as always, everybody. Bye now.